When Star Wars Rebels first aired in 2014, replacing the fan-beloved Star Wars The Clone Wars series, many fans already felt it was too childish or disliked it simply for replacing The Clone Wars, but in many ways, it surpassed that show and many fans' expectations, including mine. This is Anthony, aka The Almighty Hutt, and let's examine why I believe Star Wars Rebels is superior to Star Wars The Clone Wars. This should go without saying, but there are major spoilers ahead for both shows, so continue at your own risk. But seriously, if you haven't watched these shows yet, do yourself a favor and get on that, and then come back and let me know what you thought in the comments below. But without further ado, let's get into the video. When you look at the differences between the two series, a lot of it comes down to personal preference, including the visual style, tone, characters, and overall story of the series. After all, art is subjective, and television is art. With that in mind, do not take this video as a fact or as an attack on your favorite show of the two, because I really do love both shows, but simply as one person's opinion on why Star Wars Rebels is better than The Clone Wars. Starting with visual style, Rebels looks a lot more smoothly animated than The Clone Wars, and that's likely just due to better technology and a higher budget thanks to Disney's deep pockets. But the show is also more cinematic to me, almost on par with the films during certain scenes. The action scenes in The Clone Wars were no doubt visually striking, but you could still take one glance and be reminded just in the animation that yes, you're watching a cartoon. And while Rebels of course is still an animated show, the way it's shot scene to scene and the way it immersed you in battles and action sequences almost made you forget that you're watching a cartoon. It's really that good. Second, moving on to tone, Rebels didn't get quite as dark as The Clone Wars did at times, but it didn't need to. That's not to say Rebels didn't have some darker scenes, it certainly did, but it was a more lighthearted show. The thing that really sets Rebels apart, however, is that while it didn't get as dark as far as violence and things of that nature, it still managed to handle heavier themes and concepts than The Clone Wars ever did. While in The Clone Wars we see a lot of the corruption in the Republic and the Jedi Order, and basically how war can test loyalties, Rebels handled much more personal themes, such as what's the morally right way to fight your enemies, and having the vision to see the larger picture instead of focusing on your own personal desires, and accepting and owning your past, just to name a few. It just shows that subject matter can be deep and impactful without being dark. Onto the characters. Where Rebels really shone bright was when each character had personal struggles to face. Sabine with her Mandalorian past, Kanan with how it was revealed that he ran during Order 66 and his incomplete training as a Jedi, Ezra with his parents and wanting to help Lothal, but having to wait for the right time, Hera with facing her father, and Zeb with helping his people fulfill their ancient prophecy. Just about every character brought into this show grew in some way or another, including all the ones I just named, but even Maul, Ahsoka, and even some of the pirates like Hondo and Vizago grew at least a little bit. I also find the villains of Rebels to be much more intriguing than the Clone Wars. The Inquisitors are alright, but I was more than okay with seeing Grand Admiral Thrawn replace them by Season 3 as the main antagonist of Rebels moving forward. Thrawn analyzing battlefields and artifacts to figure out the best course of action is way better and more suspenseful to me than watching General Grievous go in episode after episode just trying to kill everything in his path. It shows you that you don't always have to rely on action to make a moment great. The Clone Wars did have some sentimental moments, but I feel that Rebels did it more often and way better. Where the Clone Wars had the advantage of using more established characters for the main cast, Rebels focused almost entirely on new characters. There were a few cameos from the films and a few Clone Wars characters here and there, but they were treated as just that, cameos, with the exception of maybe Rex, Ahsoka, and Hondo. Now, where the Clone Wars had the advantage of using pre-established characters more often like Anakin and Obi-Wan, it also had the disadvantage of being more of an anthology series, meaning it jumps from story arc to story arc, usually around 3 to 4 episodes each, and focusing on different characters, planets, and parts of the war. I think this format worked for the show, but Rebels' use of a mostly single continuous storyline that always followed the Ghost Crew worked much better to me. It allowed us to focus several episodes on a single member of the crew and whatever struggle they were facing, allowing for deeper character development and more emotional payoff for big events in these characters' journeys. Even with the Clone Wars being over 40 episodes longer than Rebels, I feel more attached to the crew of the Ghost, and by that I mean all of them individually, than I did for the Clone Wars versions of Anakin and Obi-Wan once the show wrapped, and even more so than Ahsoka. Trust me, I loved Ahsoka in the Clone Wars, but I seriously think I connected to any of Hera, Ezra, Kanan, and Sabine more in Rebels than I did to her in the Clone Wars. And I think this is largely due to each show's respective episode format. I also love how the characters of the Ghosts are all diverse in that they all have their own personalities, traits, and struggles that each make them unique, but at the same time, they all feel like one unified character, the Ghost Crew, like a family. That's how they saw themselves, and that's how I and many other fans see them as well. Focusing on overall story now, like I said, the Clone Wars is largely about the corruption of the Galactic Republic at the time, and the people within it, and it was largely Ahsoka's story as well. But again, like I said, the format of the show doesn't allow it to have a true, cohesive, overarching story, instead opting for story arcs that jump around different characters and locations around the galaxy. This is fine, it works for the show. But as I said, it's all personal preference, and personally, I much prefer Rebels' ability to follow Ezra from Lothal to the Rebellion and back to Lothal, which allows for a much more satisfying conclusion as well, because we get to see these characters' stories throughout their purpose in the show and in the galaxy. Now, of course, there are cliffhangers involved in the Rebels finale, and so their fates aren't all that definitive yet, but what I mean is that their purpose for this show and this story is over. Even with characters like Ezra, Sabine, Thrawn, and Ahsoka, whose ultimate fates we don't yet truly know, there is closure because they served their purpose for Rebels as a show. It was always about Ezra liberating Lothal and learning about the Force and sparking the larger rebellion, which he does, and in doing so, serves his purpose along with the other three characters I just mentioned. If and when Lucasfilm decides to continue his story with Ahsoka, Thrawn, and Sabine, sure, it will be the same characters, but their purposes will be entirely different at that point, which is why Rebels ended with complete closure for me without revealing the exact fate of all our characters. They're leaving doors open and I'm fine with that. As long as their absence from the Galactic Civil War is well explained, I don't need to know that they died or whatever. Not everything needs to end like Rogue One just because they weren't around in the original trilogy. For Rogue One, obviously that worked and made more sense, but you get the idea. And before everyone complains to me that the Clone Wars hasn't really ended yet, I know, but it's more than likely going to end exactly how we all think it will, because it has to tie perfectly with Revenge of the Sith. Rebels being a little more removed from the start of Rogue One allowed for the ending we got, but the Clone Wars won't have that luxury, because we already know what needs to happen. That's not saying I don't think the ending of the Clone Wars will be good, I'm sure it will, but I don't see any way it will top Rebels' conclusion, for me at least. Finally, the music, and this is the one where I think most people will agree with me. Again, just about everything I've said is personal preference, but I think that Kevin Kiner's musical score for Rebels beats his score for the Clone Wars by leaps and bounds. In the Clone Wars, the music felt very much like a sort of background to the scene, but in Rebels, it's a part of the scene. I really think Kiner evolved as a composer between these two shows, because the score for Rebels absolutely blew me away. The specific scene I think of when I think of a great example of how beautifully Kiner's score enhances the most emotional scenes of Rebels is the end of the episode Trials of the Darksaber, when Sabine is fighting Kanan with the Darksaber and explaining the truth behind how she built weapons for the Empire, that the Empire used them against her own people and that she ran to try to help them, but they saw her as a traitor. Yeah, that scene. And the music playing at the time is just so beautiful and makes the scene 1,000 times better and more emotional. Another great example is of course the Ahsoka vs. Vader duel in the Season 2 finale Twilight of the Apprentice, with the chilling music as Ahsoka hears Anakin's voice inside of Vader's suit for the first time. The Clone Wars had a few good themes as well, but the ones used in Rebels to me are far more memorable and better made use of. To recap, I personally believe that Star Wars Rebels is superior to the Clone Wars in almost every way, including visual style, tone, characters, overall story, music, and more. That doesn't mean that the Clone Wars is bad by any means though, it's still a great show, but it more so speaks to the level of quality that Rebels is. Rebels is truly on another level storytelling-wise, not just for an animated TV show, not just for a Star Wars story, but also as a story, period. It's up there for me with even my favorite Star Wars films, and the Ghost Crew will forever hold a very special place in my heart. I can't wait to see the story of the remaining characters with uncertain fates that I mentioned earlier, and I hope that I don't have to wait too long. In addition, Rebels' contribution to the lore and universe of Star Wars is impressive for an animated show, introducing canon elements such as the Inquisitorius, the World Between Worlds, the Bendu, and showing us how the Rebellion went from several separate cells to a single organized alliance, just to name a few. Not to mention bringing Grand Admiral Thrawn in from Legends. Anyways, that's my opinion on Star Wars Rebels. I went into the show expecting to not like it nearly as much as I did the Clone Wars, and came out loving it way more. I can't wait to see how Dave Filoni outdoes himself next time. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below which show is your favorite and why, so we can discuss. Follow my social media links in the description below for even more updates on Star Wars and my channel, and stay tuned for more future content. Until next time, may the Force be with you all.